Welcome to the world of CDR Beer Lab, the fast and easy-to-use analysis system designed for breweries of all sizes. With CDR Beer Lab, you can monitor in real time the quality of your beer, from the grain to the finished product, analyzing parameters like bitterness, color, alcohol content, and much more, all directly in your brewery. No more waiting for lab results. As the Brewfeast brewery claims, with CDR Beer Lab, the immediate benefit was undoubtedly the speed of execution in the various analyses that we undertake here in-house in the internal laboratory. Simple, accurate and fast. With CDR Beer Lab, controlling every stage of production is within everyone's reach. Let's discover how to enhance your beer with a professional tool and immediate results.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for coming to hear this presentation. I'm extremely excited about this particular topic. So my name is Shauna Barnes. I'm the founding partner at Barnes Beverage Group, which is a law firm that specializes in acting as external general counsel to beverage companies of all type. But kind of our sweet spot is alcohol beverage and pretty much any kind of intoxicating beverage, although we certainly represent traditional beverage as well. And this particular topic is one that over probably the last 18 months, and we've had hemp-derived product, frankly, since the Farm Bill was passed, we've had a number of questions about it. People have looked at it, but just in the last 18 months, this particular category has taken off. So I'm extremely excited about the opportunity to go over this today. A lot of our traditional craft brewery clients in particular are really looking to expand into this space. So I'm excited to go through it. Goal here today is to, there we go. Goal here today is to kind of go over the overview for you if you're considering making a hemp-derived beverage, intoxicating hemp-derived beverage, and then kind of get into some of the threshold questions that you should consider to decide if you want to go, no go on this. And if it's a go, some things you really want to think through operationally to determine whether or not, again, this is going to be something that's going to work for you. As a disclaimer, I'm a lawyer, not your lawyer, so anything I say here today shouldn't be considered legal advice specific to you. So I recommend that you consult your attorney if this is something that you want to do, or call your state regulator to get a little more information. But we are going to go over quite a bit of legal goodness today. So hopefully, and if there are any questions, of course, throw them in the chat. I'll do my best to respond in real time, or if I can't get to it, I've only got 45 minutes for a super meaty topic. So feel free to send me an email afterward. I'll leave the contact screen up. And I'll be happy to answer anything that comes up there. So, all right. So I want to kind of lay the groundwork here for this type of product. So first of all, this is one of the fastest, and I've been in the craft beer industry now for almost 15 years, and this is the fastest I've ever seen anything move. We have a client, so we represent a number of clients, breweries that are kind of expanding into this space, but also some who are, hemp-derived beverage only. So if you see HDB throughout my presentation, that's what I'm talking about. I'll explain what that means in a moment. But we have some clients that have asked us to look at this from a 50-state perspective. Where can they sell this nationally? How can they sell it? Where do they need to get licensed? One client in particular, we delivered a survey to him in May, and I think we've updated that survey 15 times. In July, there was a big push of changes. Just in the last couple of weeks, there's been a big push of changes. So this is an area that is really fast moving. Today is October 14th, 2024. If you're listening to this, April 14th, 2025, just a heads up that you may want to check to make sure that anything that I'm saying specifically as to the law is accurate. Although I do think the framework itself is probably still going to be really good. So just kind of a quick heads up disclaimer there, in addition to the not your lawyer, unless I am your lawyer, in which case call me and I'll help you with things. The other thing I want to kind of talk about is the changes that are moving so rapidly here are not just from a regulatory framework, right? And I'm going to get into the weeds on this in a moment, but it's it's moving at the federal level slowly, but also at the state level very quickly. And where state legislators maybe haven't been super interested in legislating on this in the past, we found in the very recent months that governors and state agencies have started using emergency powers, issuing emergency orders and emergency executive orders from the governor, and then also some AG opinions, attorney general opinions, kind of weighing in on this space. The implications of that and how it will impact you and this product, are kind of fact specific. So again, just kind of threshold heads up on that. But at a very basic level, making sure my goal today is to make sure you understand where you can and can't sell and whether you have a risk of not being able to sell in the future. Based on what you're creating, what you think you want to create, because we have lots of clients that are going into this space, and we want to make sure that any capital investments or money that you're diverting to a product like this is well spent, right? Just because it is moving so fast. So to kind of lay the groundwork, I know that it feels like every week we get bad news on the craft beer front where trends are down declining. And so again, lots of folks are looking at this. And what we usually get from a threshold call from our client is, I want to make it because I like to drink it and I think it would be a good differentiator. What in the heck do I do? Right? So to lay some very, very basic groundwork, I was chatting with one of my colleagues about this earlier, and I think he said it perfectly. Think of the marijuana plant, the cannabis plant. I should be clear. Think of the cannabis plant, because the words kind of get complicated and they do matter. Think of the cannabis plant like a pepper plant. So the cannabis plant contains dozens of chemicals that affect the body in various different ways, right? And we call those cannabinoids. And then from there are two cannabinoids that are, I think, most popular, most interesting coming out of the plant. And one is CBD and one is THC. And the kind of where the THC comes from, which is the part that gets you high, is so the THC comes from delta 9. So when you think of, when you hear, when you see, when you're looking at the labeling and you see delta 9, that is the part of the plant that's actually psychoactive. That's what will get you high. But marijuana and hemp, for all intents and purposes, are the same thing. It's cannabis, right? So the difference is how much of that delta 9 THC thing that gets you high the plant contains. And if it's 0.3% or less of the plant, right, that gets you high, it's hemp. And if the weight of the THC is more than 0.3% of the plant, it's marijuana. And so kind of getting back to my pepper plant, and Michael, my team, and I were chatting about this, think of it as like, you can have a bell pepper or you can have, a jalapeno pepper. And one is bland and kind of boring, but it's got some of the stuff in it that makes it hot, right? The oil in it that makes it hot. Whereas, and so the bell pepper plant's going to have just a little bit. It's going to be kind of sweet and boring, maybe, I don't know. I'm not a huge regular pepper fan, but then you've got like the spicy pepper plant that will, potentially wreck your day if you eat all of it. And it's got more of that oil. And the kind of the THC plants are the same. It's the same plant, but like one's a bell pepper and that's hemp, and one is a jalapeno, and that's cannabis, if that makes sense, or marijuana, at least for the purposes of the federal definitions, which I'll get into. When you hear the terms delta 8, delta 9, those are similar chemical structures, but they're kind of slightly different. We're not going to spend a lot of time today talking about delta 8, delta 9. They, for a variety of reasons, state laws don't really love them. They're becoming a little more banned. And the delta 9 is really the thing that folks are most interested in, because when you kind of concentrate the delta 9 again and you put it into a beverage, that is ultimately what gives the sensation of intoxication, which is what most of us are looking for. So how do we get to the spot where I'm like starting off a presentation talking about pepper plants and what's going to spice your food out of control and what's going to be boring? Well, Congress passed the Farm Bill in 2018, and the goal was to give tobacco farmers something else to make, right? People aren't smoking. They have all this farmland, generational farms. And the hemp lobby kind of went to Congress and said, hey, like, you can use hemp to make rope and clothing and, you know, all these sorts of other things. It's a great sustainable product to make things from. They were not going to them and saying, although let's be candid, they probably knew, yo, and we can concentrate the heck out of it and people can get high, right? So when you look at the laws, when you look at the definitions, when you look at kind of the framework, it's geared toward rope and clothing. It is not geared toward food, which is going to explain a lot of the weird stuff I'm about to go in the weeds on, right? So when they passed this law, they weren't thinking of the loophole, they were thinking of rope and clothing. And so what they did was legalize hemp by giving it its own definition in the federal laws that excluded it from the definition of marijuana. So marijuana was a controlled substance and was scheduled for enforcement, right? So you couldn't make it, you couldn't have the seeds, you couldn't have anything to do with it. Having it would, you know, send you to jail, do not pass go, you know, do not collect $200. But by saying, hey, this product, you know, there's pepper plants, we want to legalize the bell pepper plants. We're going to keep the jalapeno plants illegal. That's kind of where we ended up in this spot. But what we all knew is you can concentrate the heck out of a bell pepper plant and dig out the good stuff that gets you high. I mean, I wouldn't recommend eating bell pepper plants to get high, but you catch my drift. When you look at the definition, it authorized the production of hemp and hemp seeds. And what we're really looking at is that 0.3% by dry weight. So if it has less, as I said before, if it has the less than the 0.3% or less, bell pepper legal. Over 0.3% jalapeno illegal, or kind of shoved over to the states to be regulated as part of the cannabis scheme in that state, right? It also kind of by its definition, practically authorized hemp derivatives like CBD, Delta 8 and Delta 10, although like I said, those are different. So now we're in a spot where it's federally legal to make it, sell it. The government sees it as eating leaves. We know that it's a leaf that you can concentrate to get you high, right? The FDA and the FTC kind of came on after and have their own opinion about it. So the FDA takes the position that products containing cannabis, period, or any kind of THC derivative, including the hemp-derived products, are not recognized as safe for human consumption and should not be put into food going into interstate commerce. And so any food with a cannabis ingredient whatsoever is considered to be adulterated. So put a pin in that for a second because I'm going to dig in just a bit. I think everybody here know I'm speaking to an audience of folks who brew, right? You know that when you go to get a product, when you go to make a beer, you're going to ensure that the product is generally recognized as safe. So that's why, like, you can put oranges in a beer, but, you know, stemming back from my dogfish days, we couldn't put yarrow in a beer because yarrow wasn't generally recognized as safe to be eaten. So we had to go through a whole thing to try to get it grass. I remember trying to get monk fruit grass, right? So there's steps that you have to go through. And where I can convince the TTB that monk fruit can be in a beer as a sweetener and we can make delightful, slightly mighty, it's much more difficult. And in fact, I won't convince the federal government that we should be allowed to put cannabis, and whether it's the bell pepper version or the full-on jalapeno version, into a product and eat it, because the studies haven't been done and it's not federally legal in the way that we all want to use it. So they've kind of put a little bit of a break there. But the key piece, and what I want to kind of dig in on a minute before going over to the other issue is, you know, it's in interstate commerce. So the FDA really only has jurisdiction over things being put into interstate commerce, which is where you get state regulatory schemes that allow you to make a product from seed to glass, right? So you grow it, you make it, you're the one that does the extraction, you put it in, or what have you. So what we kind of assume, because there's plenty of products out there, like there's lots of stuff in Minnesota right now, for example, that were made in South Carolina or made here in Maryland, right? And sent there. We all just kind of live in this fiction that it just showed up there one day, but that's not actually, I don't think the FDA would like that fiction. So just be aware there is a little bit of risk there because they are able to sort of govern what's in interstate commerce, but not necessarily necessarily what's made within one state top to bottom. The FTC has also weighed in on this particular issue, and they don't want marketing of CBD or THC products, regardless of whether it's the hemp-derived, bell pepper or the super spicy jalapeno. Practically though, right? So that's like all your federal, like kind of legal, but the FDA doesn't like it and the FTC doesn't like it. Practically speaking though, the FDA really only has given warning letters to CBD, Delta 9, D8, and D10 products that were made in food and had something else wrong with it. So it was marketed to children. It stole somebody else's trademark. I think there was like a Fruity Pebble ones that got a cease and desist. There's like an unsubstantiated health claim, like this beverage will cure your, whatever ails you. So those are the ones that are kind of have gotten the letters. For the most part, they have been pretty passive in this space. So you do have, while a hemp-derived product is going to be federally legal to make, you do have kind of this gray area risk at the federal level from the FDA and FTC, but you can mitigate that risk by just, frankly, being a responsible producer, right? Doesn't get rid of it altogether. Who knows what's going to happen, but just kind of thinking that there is a threshold matter. I also want to flag as a threshold matter that there is a 2024 amendment to the Farm Bill that's being worked on right now that would exclude the products that we care about from that definition of hemp. So basically what they want to do is exclude cannabinoids that are not capable of being naturally produced by the hemp plant if there was the result of a chemical synthesis or if they contain a total THC concentration of greater than 0.3% dry weight, right? So getting back to our pepper plant analogy, we're essentially, you're running a chemical synthesis on the product to make it spicy, to get the hemp out, or to get the THC out, to have it be of a substance that will get you high. When I was chatting about this with my colleague Mike, he cracked me up. He was saying that, if you just took a hemp plant, like a true hemp plant, and you just like chewed on the leaf, like it'd be like eating lettuce, right? Whereas if like you chewed on a cannabis leaf, like a marijuana leaf, like that might do something to you. But if you concentrate that hemp and you get all the THC out of it, you can turn it into something that will get you high, right? So hopefully that all lands, makes sense. There are questions, shoot them. But yeah, so the important thing to flag though is if this amendment passes, the industry will essentially be killed because if you can't concentrate the THC out of the hemp plant, I don't want to drink a lettuce drink, right? Like the whole kind of driver of the product goes away. I can't get high from it or have the relaxing feel that I want from it. And so maybe, so something to keep an eye on. It's going to take years to get there. By that point, hopefully we'll just be fully federally legal and it won't be an issue. And then the FDA can weigh in and give us some regulatory guidance. So all of that to say then, from a federal standpoint, this is no man's land, right? So it's kind of a funny, there's if it is the hemp version, they thought it was going to be rope and close, right? So there's no rules at the federal level. There's no labeling requirements at the federal level. There's no, there's really not much to hook into. It's not fully legal. FDA doesn't like it. It's not safe for food, but like, there's not a lot of regulation. And so it gets into this interesting place where the states, much like alcohol, get to have their say, and they kind of fall into three buckets. And so you've got one set of states that kind of mimics the federal actions of the Farm Bill. They left the hemp products completely unregulated. So everything I just said applies, right? Then you have a second group of states that just passed new regulations, said, haha, I see you. I see that loophole. Don't want that loophole. No, right? So you cannot have it in the state. We treat this just like any other, kind of regular marijuana. It's, it's illegal. It's scheduled under our rules, and we don't care about the Farm Bill. Like, we're done, right? And this is, you'll see, there's been a lot of movement in California. This is what California just tried to do. It's up for interpretation. There's already a lawsuit to block this interpretation, but that's kind of what's happening there. But what you have that I think is the most interesting is this kind of middle group of states, and they actively regulate hemp post decriminalization, and they kind of fall into two buckets. The first bucket is like your Louisiana, Kentucky, Minnesota, who realize that there's money to be made here. the constituents want this product. And so if they can figure out a framework to like make it happen, they can maybe tax it. They can have it on their wholesalers' trucks. They can make sure that it's sold to folks of a legal drinking age. They can kind of control it. And so you'll see in those states, there's some licensing, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail in a moment. But then you also have states like Maryland and Washington that, so Washington just said, oh, no, this is an intoxicating product, must be sold in the dispensary through our recreational program. My home state of Maryland, well, I don't say home state, I'm from Pennsylvania, but the state I currently live in and have been in for the last 15 years, kind of ran into an interesting situation. So we legalized recreational marijuana, cannabis in 2023 for adult recreational use, July 2023. And when they drafted the statute, they pulled in all of the hemp products as well and said anything coming from a cannabis plant, whether it's a bell pepper or a cayenne pepper, or I'm sorry, jalapeno pepper, I think is the metaphor I've been using, it goes through the dispensary. You must buy it from a licensed dispensary. But there were plenty of, and I may or may not know anything about about this, but there were plenty of folks who were making hemp-derived products that were legal under the Farm Bill, because previously we were a state that just fell under the Farm Bill definitions. And so there were plenty of products that were getting to consumers, either direct to consumer or just sold on the shelf of a gas station. And they suddenly overnight were not allowed to have those products on the shelves anymore. And so they sued the state, and we'll see what happens. But there's been an injunction in place as to those particular products. But if I'm a newbie, I can't come in. And so we'll see how that kind of plays out. But even, that's a good example of a state that I would have said, green light, go for it. 3 years ago is now a state where, it really can only be sold through the cannabis system. So, okay. So that's the framework. That's a lot, right? Again, I just want to, and I'm going to kind of go back to it here. I just want to be clear, understanding kind of where you're at, what you're trying to sell, where you're trying to sell it, and how the states are going to treat it is going to be that threshold question that you need to know and understand to determine whether or not it makes sense to do this, right? To invest in a product like this. All right. So there's your framework. So now let's get to like, what are you making and what are the risks to current operations? So if your goal is to make a CBD or like a terpene only product, remember they don't cause intoxication, right? So it's the hemp-derived THC infused beverages with Delta-9 that has been concentrated that will get you high. And frankly, I think at least a lot of my clients like to mix the two together to have a CBD or a THC to achieve a certain effect of intoxication or relaxation or a combination thereof when they make the product. However, you need to check your state's laws to figure out what makes the most sense there, right? Because as I went through kind of the federal tensions, the 3 stick the dose matters, some states treat CBD one way, treat hemp another way, treat cannabis, pure marijuana another way. Some treat them all the same. Some have different rules for CBD as compared to like a Delta-9 hemp-derived product. Like there's a lot there. Some fully, like I think it's Texas in particular, fully outlaws Delta-8, Delta-10, but allows Delta-9 and the hemp-derived product. So just kind of understand, like at a threshold level, before you get to a point where you're sourcing a bunch of things, buying a bunch of things to figure out what you want to make, or perhaps engaging a co-packer, which I'll get into in a moment, to make this product for you, understand, like, am I even going to be able to make the thing I want to make to hit the target audience and the target market that I want to meet, right? So just kind of thinking through that there. So your very first step should be to check, the federal framework is the federal framework, and I'll go over how to not tick off the FDA and FTC in a moment, but your federal framework's your federal framework. You need to really focus in on what is the rule of your state and what is the rule of the states where you want to sell this to consumers. So check to see how they treat CBD, check to see how they treat hemp-derived products. As I said, some of them are going to be cannabis. They got to go through the cannabis rec system. Some are going to be CBD non-intoxicating. There seems to be a lot more grace in most states for that, but frankly, not all. And then kind of your Delta-9 loophole, all of that. Something you certainly want to understand. I will tell you that I feel for clients who come to me on this and, they're in Maryland, right? My state here, where, they make a 5 milligram product that's meant to be consumed, and maybe you have two. I think I'm showing my uh my cannabis tolerance, lightweightness there. So like you're meant to have like one or two, and that's going to be your whole night, right? It's a 2 milligram dose, it's a 5 milligram dose. They want to sell you a 6-pack. They want you to have multiple drinking occasions. Like there's just no space for these products in a dispensary. So a lot of times my clients say, I'm a strong Maryland state, I only want to sell in Maryland. It may not make sense. Like this may not make sense for you to sell into your market. Maybe you want to look into another. Maybe maybe this isn't the one, and you want to make a non-alc or something else instead to be your differentiator. So just kind of something to think about there as you're working through it. The other thing I do want to flag is that some states do have dosing requirements. So they don't allow more than 2 milligrams per serving in food or beverages. And there are states that are kind of proposing different dosage level limits, which again sort of leads to an interesting scenario where if you're trying to make a product that you're going to sell into multiple states, and let's say you're going to sell it into a state with a dosing requirement, and you're going to sell it into a state where no matter what you put in it, it's got to go through a dispensary. You end up in this weird situation where you're in the dispensary in one state on the shelf of a maybe not Harris Teeter, but we're just going to throw that out there, like a chain store in another state. And, on one, one shelf, you're next to, beer and maybe some other stuff. And on another, you're like next to the 100 milligram, like gummy o death, where like you bite a corner and you hope for the best. So, just kind of thinking through like, what's your dosage going to be? What's the dosage requirement going to be? And it may be that, what works for one state doesn't work for another. Are you going to make two different products? Or are you going to try to make one product and standardize? All of this, because it is so fast moving, leads to some really interesting conversations and results. But I just want to make sure if this is something that you're doing, my goal here is to make sure that you're considering it ahead of time. So you don't run down a path where you're loving a product we have a client right now that's got a product that's 10 milligrams. It's fabulous. It's like drinking, to me, it's like having a bourbon, in terms of like you have one, maybe you have two and you're done for the night. Like it's kind of the same idea, but that client can't sell it into a handful of states because of the dosing requirements. And so we're trying to figure out, does he make a lighter dose? Do we just skip that state? Like, how do we do it? So get ahead of those issues before you start playing around with formulation, because I know time and resources are precious. All right. The other thing to consider is where you're going to be producing, right? So some states won't allow you to have a hemp production license and a liquor production license in the same state. And you really want to check the definition of production because there are some states that won't let you, use your brewery equipment to also make a hemp-derived product. There are other states that are silent on it. But I have a couple of clients who, for risk mitigation reasons, have decided that they'd rather have the product co-packed somewhere else and shipped in and then sold because their license will allow that or what have you. And a few others that have looked at this, and then we've realized that their brewery licensing doesn't really allow them to do that. So just kind of understanding, like, is your state a state that makes you stay in one or the other? And then similarly, there may be some licensing requirements to be able to make a hemp-derived product or a hemp intoxicating product that the requirements to do what they want you to do there actually conflict with alcohol and jeopardize each other. So there are some that just outright ban it. There are others that by statute and practicality and commercial reality kind of ban it. So again, check the rules, make sure that you don't fall into that. And then there are others that's like, it's a state where even if the product's hemp, falls under the Farm Bill, you feel like you're good to go. Your brewery license might not let you sell anything other than alcoholic beverages, water, and snacks, right? We've had that happen for a few of our clients. So we talk about other ways to get the product out. So maybe you're not selling it in your tasting room, but you are selling it to a distributor. So just think through where you want this to be served, how you want to do it, and then try to navigate it through your state regulatory scheme before you, again, start formulating and planning. My goal here with these couple of slides is to just really give you some things to think about ahead of time so that you know what you want and you don't run down a path wasting a ton of time, money, and treasure working on something that ultimately has to be tweaked or changed. There's nothing that this council makes me feel worse than saying, well, you got to change the whole formulation because, or, well, I know that was all going to be a whole on-prem play, but you can't because, so just flagging that there. And then a final thing that I think is very interesting is, okay, so you may be totally good and you can sell it, you're good to go. It's hemp in the state, there's no rules, your brewery license is great, let you sell all the things, like you can sell it in the tasting room, you can sell it to your distributor, like good to go. But you also may need to get additional licensing to make just a regular beverage. So like there are some states where, we're so focused on what we need to be able to do to make a brewery, but you've got kind of that like concurrent licensing, like you do at the federal level where, FDA technically has some regulatory, I mean, not technically, they do have regulatory authority over beverages. And then TTB has an add-on. Some states are kind of similar, but flipped, right? So like you've got a bunch of stuff and then usually the health department or something will have additional add-ons. So just make sure you've investigated that, determine whether or not you need or want that licensing, so you don't get tripped up on something silly. Yes. All right. Let's see. Let me make sure I got everything there. Oh, I've got one other point I actually want to make on this slide. So I've been talking a lot about producing it in state. I want to talk a moment about producing it. There we go. I was going to say, I want to talk a little bit about producing it out of state. I got a little behind myself. These are the things we're going to talk about now. So licensing, distribution, labeling, marketing, all that good stuff. So in my mind, we're moving forward. We're doing it. All right. So we figured out how you manufacture it in state, and now you maybe want to sell it out of state. I think of like the Minnesotas of the world that have really embraced this category and are doing really cool things with it. Like that's a great target market. The distributors all over it. You can get shelf placement. I was just in a state recently where it was all over the shelves in the coffee shops, which I thought was super cool. Like it was a recreational legal state, but the hemp-derived products are in a coffee shop. So that was, the heck was I? It's like trains, planes, and automobiles. I think it was in Montana. So just something to kind of, think about there. You've got I can make it in state. Out of state, it's not quite like alcohol licensing. So we have a number of situations where we have clients who are making these products in their home state. They're then sending them to out-of-state licensing or to out-of-state distributors to be sold into retail because retailers want this, right? The coffee shops want it. The coffee shops want it. Retail stores want it. Total Wine wants it. Like you name it, they want it because it sells. And it's filling out beer trucks. And so the beer distributors want it because if beer is flat to down, this is a really great thing for them to put on their truck to help service. And if you have those low dose products, it sits nicely next to a beer, right, on the shelf. So our clients come to us, and frankly, the distributors come to us and say, well, are you licensed? Is this legal in my state? And so we draft up a little opinion paper telling them what we think. Obviously not giving legal advice, but kind of laying out the framework as we see it so a distributor can then take it to their council and make a decision. What we found, though, is they come back and they say, great, we'll take it, but we need your license. What license? A number of states have no licensing for out-of-state shipper. You've got this weird fiction where the product just shows up because technically FDA doesn't want it in interstate commerce. So everybody just kind of looks the other way. The product just shows up on the shelf. And so there's no license. I don't know if it's the states just don't want to touch it because it's not necessarily falling within their framework, or the states that do only regulate in-state producers. So like let's use Maryland as an example, even though it's not quite apples to apples because our state doesn't allow it. Like I would have to make it here to sell it into retail in Maryland. Like that's what some of these states have, or to get the license to. And where normally you'd have a really great like dormant commerce clause, constitutional argument that you can't favor your in-state producers over your out-of-state producers and set up a framework where you only benefit in-state and not out-of-state. Like this thing lives in a loophole. No one's making a dormant commerce clause challenge because it's not technically supposed to be an interstate commerce per FDA, right? So it's got this weird situation, and frankly, we're still navigating through it. That's a trend that we've seen in the last 4 to 6 weeks. So if your distributor comes to you and says, cool, we'll take it, but you got to show us a copy of your license, you may be in a spot where you're educating that distributor on kind of everything that we've talked through here and why, it's maybe an acceptable amount of gray or acceptable amount of risk to bring the product in, even though it's unlicensed, because it's in a license that you would be ineligible for. We have another client who's a pretty large producer on this, who's just kind of gotten them like applied for them anyway, even though it's not really the appropriate license, but that way they're showing the state that they're kind of trying to comply. So just kind of a weird quirk to think about. The other thing to kind of think about from an in-state, out-of-state thing, and we'll spend a little bit more time on labeling in a moment, but a lot of states have their own labeling requirements for these products. So, it's required. I remember in Maryland, it's supposed to be like an MD-D9, right? So to like say like this product came from Maryland, and you can't meet that requirement. Or if you put it on your label, it's not necessarily true. So just some like sticky things to think through, because this really is the Wild West, right? Like it's the Wild West of product. Everyone's doing their best, and we'll get into sort of best practices in a moment, assuming you're going to move forward. But yeah, just some things to kind of think through, especially in your own state and in your key markets. Cool. Okay. Briefly, let's talk about distribution. So some things to think about. Do you have to use your current network? Well, I don't know. Probably not by statute. Although I look at it just to check in case if you're a very strong brand extension state, you may want to take a quick peek just to make sure there's nothing there, but probably not by statute, but maybe by contract. We have a number of clients who said that anything that's sold into the market bearing that trademark goes to that distributor. Well, what if they don't want it? Or they don't have the risk tolerance to take it? Like something to kind of work through, challenge, and they may not be the right partner for a variety of reasons, right? Some of these states have really great distributors popping up whose whole model is to service the markets where hemp-derived beverages can be. So kind of thinking through how you're going to get this to market, checking your contracts just to keep you from tripping up on that. And then self-distribution DTC. I mean, yeah, probably, right? I mean, I think we all know like TikTok, Instagram markets these things directly to us. So it's certainly happening. If you look at some of the largest producers of these products, you can get it shipped straight to your house. So it's an option. It can be a really good margin option. Though what we do find is most clients, so what we recommend is that you shut down any states where you know it's not lawful for it to be, right? Like let's just not borrow trouble. Those states will enforce, send you a cease and desist, and then it has impacts for your main alcohol brands because they'll flag you as like that non-compliant company. And there's some risk mitigation steps and some things you can do there to sort of insulate your alcohol from your THC products, but just something to be aware of. So we recommend you just shut down the states where you know it's not legal. And then what usually ends up happening is folks will self-distribute or direct-to-consumer sell these products, which obviously they're not the same. One is selling it straight to the retailer, one's selling it straight to the consumer. And they'll do that until they get to a size where the state's industry on this gets to a size where you really want a beer distributor. And it's mostly the beer distributors, although the wine and spirits wholesalers are looking at this now as well. So just careful what you put by contract, because once you do a contract, usually DTC is shut down for that state. So if you're doing a really good margin, like good volume there, make sure the juice is worth the squeeze if you're going to give your distribution rights to a distributor, and expect them to ask for a regular old, like they're going to pretend there's a franchise law and they're going to put it in by contract. So just be prepared. Make sure you negotiate the things that are your must-haves, must-not-haves, and then you'll kind of have your walkaways from there. I also want to flag in these distribution agreements, there's been a lot over the last 6 to 8 months, I think, because there's been so much interest, but also volatility in this space from beer distributors, is the plan for what are we going to do if the law changes, right? So, where, if you're Maryland and you gave your rights to the beer distributor down the street and the beer distributor is doing a great job distributing to retail, and the state decides that it's now part of the recreational cannabis system and must be sold in a distillery or in a dispensary, what do you do? Where are you going to put it? Like, who's going to be responsible for picking up out of code? Who's going to be responsible for, getting rid of the product or responding to any state inquiries, or, the dosage change, and you've got a bunch of 10 milligram products on the shelf, and now the rules, you can only have 2. Like, what are you going to do there? How are you going to address that? Labeling changes, recovery recall, right? Like, All of these sorts of things are things you want to think about ahead of time, figure out what you must have before you get into a distribution agreement, and potentially give away some rights there. I found that if you think about these things ahead of time, go into the meeting knowing your must-haves, your okay fines, and your, whatever, no one cares. It really helps steer the conversation, it sets a good professional, serious tone, and also puts you in a spot where you're not on the back foot, kind of caught off guard when a distributor asks for these things. You're not either trying to claw something back or maybe giving something you wished you hadn't. And then finally, when you're thinking about distribution, kind of we'll say a 3B, what retail channels are available? And what are you going to do when the retail channels expand or shrink, right? So you go into Maryland now and you say, you know what, I'm going to just work with somebody, I'm based in Texas. I'm just going to go with somebody from Maryland that I know is going to be able to service the dispensaries. And I know it's not going to be a ton of volume, but who cares? It's like somebody getting it there and it's, spots on the shelf and our product's great and it's some sales and you're able to sell it in. Especially with these dispensaries. Yes, they have their own individual state licenses. Yes, a lot of them are kind of seed to product in terms of how the products get through the system, but they're all owned by the same corporate owner. So it's almost like selling into chains. Kind of think of it that way. So if you're able to get in and you're able to get that sale, maybe you pick a smaller distributor just for the purposes of product on shelf. But what happens if Maryland loses the lawsuit and it's opened back up again and now you can be at the liquor store up the street? Well, you want to be able to terminate. No, so kind of planning for retail channels to shrink, hopefully expand when you're getting into these distribution agreements, and then trying to get to a fair place so that everybody wins and is happy. All right, labeling, and I think this is we got labeling and marketing separately. Okay, so I've got only a few minutes left. So like I said, big meaty topic, trying to get through as quick as I can. Please reach out if you have any questions or topics I didn't cover after the fact. So for labeling, because of this weird situation where you've got the Farm Bill legalization, but the product is still not grass, right? There's a huge split on how to label these. Some of our clients, or some products, I should say, some products are labeled as food and others label them like dietary supplements. So even though there's technically no requirement to label them in compliance with FDA rules and regulations, we still recommend that you do, to show a level of seriousness and also to give disclosure to the consumer about what's in the product. They're used to seeing those things. And they also, your retailers are going to want to see that. They don't want to see something with nothing on it. That doesn't convey a level of professionalism to them, especially when now we're in a spot where there's lots of options. So some label as food, some label as dietary supplements. To be clear, neither is authorized, but it's kind of that like forward-looking, like take us seriously, we're trying to do right. I will say states lean toward wanting you, the ones that do have label requirements, they lean toward wanting you to label it as food. And frankly, it's our recommendation typically that you label it as food. It kind of gives, I think, some consumer confidence that the product is safe. It's been tested. To be clear, neither is wrong. If you're out there right now with a product that's labeled like a dietary supplement, by no means do you want to like yank that off the shelf, but it's something that you maybe want to think about. My thought is, like, I was talking about this with Mike earlier, like you don't want to be like creatine and horny goat weed, which is like what you're looking at when you're looking at the dietary supplement world. You want to be like with the beverages where people are like, oh, I can drink this, it's safe, it's not a problem. It's not going to give me weird reactions, right? What I will also say is to gain the trust of those chain authorizations, wholesalers, avoid enforcement actions, all those things. Like, we want you to look professional. So we do recommend that you do pick one or the other. We like FDA food and beverage, but if you go dietary supplement, whatever. But there's another component to that, because as I mentioned before, the FDA and FTC are really only going after the bad actors who are making poor life choices. So don't steal trademarks. Don't make unsubstantiated health claims. Like, that's where we're seeing the enforcement action, the warning letters. I do think that that's a space that's ultimately going to be rife with plaintiffs' lawsuits, like the labeling lawsuits that we had about a decade ago. Don't appeal to children, even if it's like a clever, like stoner culture kind of thing. We've seen a lot of enforcement and inquiries there. As I said, don't make any health claims. It's not going to cure anything. It's not going to help anything. You can describe, and we do recommend that you describe how it will make you feel. This one's relaxing. This is my daytime. This is my nighttime. Like however you want to do it that way, totally fine. But stay away from and it will make your knees not hurt or whatever. I'm not a marketer, and it shows. All right. And then kind of my last piece here is, okay, so we talked about FDA labeling. I really think that the last thing, two points I really want to make about marketing and kind of production. It's really hard right now to do something that's going to be 50 state, right? So thinking this through, kind of figuring out your strategy, maybe starting small can be a way to not get above your skis, but bring some good revenue in. It's also important, I think, not to go too big too fast with this, because you're going to want to make sure, and we strongly recommend that you test your products and you have a verifiable certified analysis. The states that do require licensing are going to want you to have this, but it's also where we've seen states really begin to focus. And that's where the fines are. If you go outside the parameters, if you stray from hemp into marijuana. Again, my background is I was at Dogfish for a while, so I'm still very plugged into Delaware. They sent out a notice a couple of weeks ago, maybe about a week ago, saying that they were testing products, finding them to be outside of compliance. They were more jalapeno than bell pepper, right? So they weren't a bell pepper. They were like an intermediate spicy-ish plant. And so, they didn't qualify as hemp. The product, because of the way that the extraction was done, it didn't qualify as hemp, or it was like on the line, but not hemp. So you want to make sure that the underlying product is certifiable and safe. And the other thing is, if this is an industry that we want to grow, making sure that we're putting good quality product on the shelf is going to be really important. And I liken it to, the bad beer of the 90s, making it really hard for craft beer to get its legs at first, because there was a lot of really crap beer out there for a while. We don't want a lot of crap hemp-derived products, right? So testing them, making sure they're good, buy from a reputable manufacturer, make sure there are no residual solvents or chemicals from that concentration process of getting the THC out of the hemp-derived product. That'll go a long way toward keeping the regulators off your back if you do decide that this is a place of gray that you want to play in to put a product out into the market. Okay, so I'm going to roll through this super fast and wrap because I am at time. So other final questions to keep in mind. Regulators don't understand these products. They're learning. The last couple of industry conferences for regulators have been really focused on this particular area. And so again, my recommendation, please be a responsible producer of this, is that this is something you're going to do, because if we have some bad issues, then the regulators will come down with a hammer, and this will be a product that doesn't make it to shelf, and they'll kill it, right? They'll just nip in the bud. Right now, none of these products are taxed, typically beyond sales and use, unless it's a state, or beyond traditional sales tax, unless it's a state that has licensing and tax payments. So just keep in mind, as you're building out your P&L, there may be taxes in the future. So if this is something that you don't want an excise tax on this product or what have you, maybe lobby. Know that the cannabis manufacturers do not like hemp-derived products. They fought really hard for recreational licensing. They paid a lot of money for those licenses. So, you just want to make sure that you're being respectful to the folks who are already there, maybe kind of coming up with an industry-wide solution. But again, this is moving. So just, don't accidentally step in it, right? Again, think about what happens if a majority of states ban the THC in CBD products. Make sure you don't get too far outside your skis, maybe dip a toe in, hit maybe the whole foot, but maybe don't cannonball. And make this be a bet the company thing if that's not something that you're prepared to weather. And then please make sure to stay on top of these rules and regulations. I bet the law changed while I was giving this presentation in at least one state. So make sure you're staying on top of it. If it's a state where you're selling, subscribe. There's some really great trade associations that report all of these things. If you're thinking about producing, you may want to join. There's the Cannabis Beverage Alliance. There's the Hemp Beverage Alliance. Both are great. They've got great folks. So if that's something, that you are thinking about doing, if I didn't scare you off, because I do think that these are some really great products that I want to see out there, then those are some trade associations that will help you stay on top of all of the changes as they come, because it's like drinking from a fire hose. Speaking of drinking from a fire hose, I am ready for a big chug of water. I don't believe I have any questions or comments that have come through. But if for whatever reason I didn't answer anything, you have any questions, this is my contact information. I try to answer every email that comes into me and give folks advice. This industry has been beautiful and wonderful to me, so I like to make time for everyone as well. So feel free to reach out, drop a line, ask a question. If you've got a product that you're thinking about making, I'm happy to give you 15, 20 minutes to help you get to a thumbs up, thumbs down about whether it makes sense for you and for your business. Thank you so much for paying attention, for listening. Thank you so much to the Craft Beer Professionals team for inviting me to do this. Loved every minute of it. Very much look forward to any questions that may come up. And